Something about Jennifer Hudson and Common never felt completely ordinary. From the outside, they look like the kind of couple Hollywood loves to celebrate. Two successful entertainers. Two highly respected names. Two people who had already built impressive careers long before they crossed paths. Jennifer Hudson had become an Oscar-winning actress and one of the most recognizable voices in entertainment. Common had built a career as a rapper, actor, writer, and public figure. So when the two became romantically linked, the reaction was almost immediate. Some fans thought they looked perfect together. Others had a completely different reaction. Because while the pictures looked beautiful, the history behind Common's relationships made some people question whether this relationship could really last. And that is where the story gets interesting. Because according to public comments and reports surrounding their relationship, there were already questions about Common's past before Jennifer ever became part of the picture. Common himself had spoken warmly about Jennifer. He praised her intelligence, her kindness, her talent, and her faith. He described her as an extraordinary woman and someone who had accomplished things that matched the high standards he had for a partner. In other words, he wasn't hiding his admiration for her. He seemed proud to be with her. But while Common was talking about Jennifer in glowing terms, people online were looking backward. They were looking at the relationships that came before her. And they started asking one uncomfortable question. Had Common actually changed? Or was Jennifer simply entering another chapter of a pattern that had already played out several times? Now, it's important to separate rumor from fact. There have been claims and online speculation suggesting that Common may have been unfaithful during his relationship with Jennifer, but those allegations should not be treated as proven simply because they spread across social media. Still, the rumors became powerful enough to create a larger conversation. People began discussing Common's history with relationships, his public image, and the women he had previously dated. And one name kept coming up: Tiffany Haddish. Before Jennifer Hudson, Common and Tiffany Haddish had been one of Hollywood's more talked-about couples. Their relationship reportedly began after they worked together on the 2019 film The Kitchen. For Tiffany, the relationship appeared to become serious. She spoke positively about Common, and for a while, the two seemed happy together. But eventually, the relationship ended. And this is where the story becomes complicated. Common later described their breakup in terms of their busy schedules and the difficulty of maintaining a relationship while both people had demanding careers. But Tiffany's perspective appeared to be different. She publicly discussed the pain of the breakup and made comments that suggested she did not view the split as something equally desired by both people. And when Jennifer Hudson later became connected to Common, some people looked back at those comments differently. Was Tiffany simply hurt? Was she expressing frustration after a painful breakup? Or was she trying to communicate something Jennifer should know? There is no definitive answer, but the speculation continued. And Common's dating history only added fuel to the conversation. He had been linked to several high-profile women over the years, including Erykah Badu. That relationship became especially significant because both artists were already established figures in music, and their romance attracted considerable public attention. But once again, the relationship eventually ended. And over the years, different accounts and perspectives emerged about why certain relationships failed. That created something social media loves: a pattern. Once people believe they see a pattern, every new event starts getting interpreted through it. And that's exactly what happened with Jennifer Hudson. When Common spoke about becoming a better partner, learning from his past, and approaching relationships with greater maturity, it sounded promising. Maybe he really had changed. Maybe the mistakes of his past had taught him something. Maybe this time was different. But then came the questions. And Jennifer's own history made those questions even more important. Because Jennifer Hudson wasn't entering the relationship with no emotional baggage. Long before Common, Jennifer had experienced a serious relationship with former WWE personality David Otunga. The two began dating in 2007 and became engaged. They also welcomed a son together. For a period, they appeared to be building a family. But eventually, their relationship became deeply troubled and ended in 2017. the breakup became highly public. There were serious accusations from Jennifer's side concerning Otunga's behavior, including claims involving controlling and intimidating conduct. Otunga denied the allegations and maintained that Jennifer's claims were false. The dispute became a very public legal and personal battle, with both sides offering different versions of what had happened. And for Jennifer, the situation was occurring against the backdrop of an extremely painful period in her personal life. She had already experienced devastating family tragedy. Her mother, brother, and nephew were murdered in 2008, an event that permanently changed her life. So imagine carrying all of that emotional history into another relationship. Trust doesn't become a simple issue anymore. It becomes everything. After experiencing heartbreak, family tragedy, and a very public relationship breakdown, Jennifer had every reason to be cautious about who she allowed into her life, which makes her relationship with Common even more fascinating. Because Common didn't simply appear as another celebrity boyfriend. He appeared as someone who seemed to represent a new chapter, a mature relationship, a relationship between two adults who had already experienced success, failure, heartbreak, and personal growth. And for a while, that seemed to be exactly what it was. But Hollywood relationships are rarely judged only by what happens behind closed doors. They're judged by what the public sees. The interviews, the photographs, the red carpet appearances, the compliments, and sometimes the silence. Common publicly spoke about Jennifer with admiration. He made it clear that he respected her accomplishments, and Jennifer appeared comfortable enough to continue the relationship publicly. But then the rumors started getting louder, and suddenly, people began comparing the relationship to Common's previous romances. The question wasn't simply whether Common loved Jennifer. The bigger question was whether love would be enough. Because a relationship can look perfect while still carrying unresolved problems underneath. And when someone has been hurt before, even a small warning sign can feel enormous. Jennifer had already learned that lesson. She had already experienced what happens when a relationship that looks stable from the outside becomes complicated behind the scenes. So if she ever believed Common had betrayed her trust, the emotional impact would likely be much bigger than one argument. It would challenge the entire foundation of the relationship. Trust, security, commitment, and the belief that this time would actually be different. That's why the speculation surrounding Jennifer and Common became so intense. People weren't simply talking about two celebrities breaking up. They were talking about whether Jennifer had finally reached the point where she would refuse to tolerate anything that made her feel disrespected. And that leads to the biggest question of all. If the rumors were true, would Jennifer forgive? Or would she do something completely different this time? Would she walk away before history could repeat itself? Because Jennifer Hudson is no longer the same woman she was years ago. She has survived extraordinary personal pain. She has built an extraordinary career. She has raised her son. And she has learned, publicly and privately, that protecting your peace sometimes means making difficult decisions. But there was still another piece of the story. The woman who had already been through a relationship with Common. The woman whose heartbreak happened before Jennifer ever entered the picture. The woman whose words would later be interpreted by some people as a warning. Tiffany Haddish. And if you look closely at what happened between Tiffany and Common, the Jennifer Hudson story becomes even more complicated. Because sometimes the most important part of a celebrity relationship isn't what happens when the cameras are watching. It's what previous relationships reveal when the cameras are gone. And that's where part 2 begins. Because the question isn't simply whether Common and Jennifer Hudson looked good together. The real question is whether the past was finally staying in the past, or quietly following them into the future. To understand why people became so interested in Jennifer Hudson and Common, you have to look beyond the headlines. Because this wasn't simply another celebrity romance. It became a conversation about patterns, about second chances, and about whether people can truly change after years of complicated relationships. Tiffany Haddish's relationship with Common became an important part of that conversation. When the two were together, Tiffany appeared emotionally invested. She had opened herself up to Common, and when the relationship ended, She was clearly affected. The breakup became public enough that people started dissecting every comment. Was Common simply moving on? Was Tiffany still emotionally attached? Or were her comments revealing a deeper problem? Again, nobody outside the relationship can know the full truth. But that didn't stop the internet from creating its own theories. And once Jennifer Hudson became Common's partner, those theories were revived. Suddenly, old interviews were being revisited. Old relationships were being discussed again. And every previous breakup became part of a larger narrative. That's how celebrity relationships work in the social media era. The past never really disappears. A 5-year-old interview can suddenly become relevant again overnight. A comment made during an old breakup can resurface. And something that once seemed unimportant can suddenly be interpreted as a warning. That's what happened here. But there was another important factor: Jennifer's personality. Jennifer Hudson has never been portrayed as someone who needs a relationship to define her. She already had an identity before Common. She had an established career. She had achieved extraordinary professional success. And perhaps most importantly, she had survived things that would have broken many people. Her family tragedy changed her forever. Her relationship with David Otunga became another painful chapter. And through it all, she continued building her career. That kind of experience changes a person's standards. Once you've been through enough, you start recognizing what you don't want. You become less interested in appearances. You become less willing to ignore uncomfortable behavior simply because the relationship looks good from the outside. And that is why the rumors surrounding Common carried so much weight. For someone like Jennifer, trust isn't a luxury. It's a requirement. But there is another side to this story that often gets lost. Rumors are not evidence. Online speculation can transform an allegation into a supposed fact within hours. A headline becomes a video. The video becomes a reaction. The reaction becomes another headline. And suddenly, thousands of people believe something happened even when there is no reliable confirmation. That's why any claim that Common cheated on Jennifer should be treated carefully unless supported by credible evidence or direct statements from the people involved. Still, the public reaction tells us something important. People were already watching this relationship closely. They were looking for signs. They were comparing the present with the past. And they were asking whether Jennifer would respond differently if she felt disrespected. That's where her previous experiences matter. Jennifer had already spent years dealing with the emotional consequences of a relationship that ultimately collapsed. She had experienced public conflict. She had experienced personal loss. She had experienced the kind of pressure that comes when private problems become entertainment for millions of strangers. So the idea that she would simply tolerate another relationship that made her feel insecure doesn't fit the image many people have of her today. She had grown. And growth changes relationships. Maybe that's why the relationship with Common initially appeared so significant. He wasn't just another celebrity. He represented maturity. He was someone who had also lived through decades of fame and relationships. He had made mistakes. He had spoken about learning from them. And he seemed to understand the importance of finding someone who is already accomplished and secure in herself. Jennifer fit that description perfectly. But here's the problem. Words are easy. Change is harder. Anyone can say they've learned from their past. Anyone can promise to become a better partner. Anyone can say they are ready for something serious. The real test comes when circumstances become difficult, when temptation appears, when schedules become demanding, when disagreements happen, when both people are under pressure. That's when character becomes visible. And that's why the Common Jennifer Hudson story attracted so much attention. People wanted to know whether this was actually a mature relationship or simply another celebrity romance that would eventually collapse under the weight of expectations. Then came another question. What did Jennifer really want? Was she looking for marriage? Was she looking for companionship? Was she simply enjoying being with someone who understood her world? Only Jennifer knows the answer. But public conversations around the relationship often made it seem as though commitment was important. And if commitment is important, then consistency matters even more. Because you cannot build a stable relationship on promises alone. You build it through behavior, through honesty, through respect, through showing up when things aren't easy. That's why the idea of Jennifer allegedly confronting Common became such a powerful part of the online narrative. The story suggested that if she discovered something she considered unacceptable, she would not simply sit quietly and accept it. But again, the exact details circulating online have not been established as fact. And that's an important distinction. What we can say is that the public became fascinated by the possibility that Jennifer would choose herself rather than remain in a relationship that didn't meet her standards. That idea resonated with people. Because Jennifer Hudson's story has never been only about romance. It's about resilience. She went through unimaginable loss and still rebuilt her life. She turned pain into strength. She continued working. She continued performing. She continued raising her son. And she continued moving forward. So perhaps the most interesting part of this entire story isn't whether Common cheated. Maybe it's the bigger lesson people took from a situation. That love should never require you to abandon your self-respect. That a famous relationship isn't automatically a healthy relationship. And that no matter how impressive two people look together in photographs, nobody outside the relationship knows what happens privately. Jennifer and Common may have genuinely cared about each other. They may have had real chemistry. They may have shared meaningful moments. And they may also have faced challenges like any other couple. Both things can be true. That's why reducing their relationship to a simple good couple or bad couple story misses the point. The real story is much more human. Two successful people with complicated histories met at a time when both had already experienced enough life to know that relationships aren't easy. Common had his history. Jennifer had hers. And when those histories came together, people naturally wondered whether the past would influence the future. Would Common truly be able to maintain the commitment he talked about? Would Jennifer feel secure enough to trust again? Would the relationship survive the pressure of fame? And perhaps the biggest question, could both people leave their past behind? Because relationships don't happen in a vacuum. Every person brings something with them. Past heartbreak, past mistakes, past fears, past expectations. Sometimes those experiences make a person stronger. Sometimes they make a person more guarded. And sometimes they create patterns that are difficult to break. For Jennifer, walking away from something unhealthy would not necessarily mean she failed. It could mean she learned. For Common, changing his approach to relationships would not simply require saying the right things. It would require proving those words through consistent actions. And for the public, the challenge is remembering that speculation is not the same as truth. We can discuss the public record. We can examine interviews. We can look at what the people involved have actually said. But we shouldn't turn rumors into facts. At the end of the day, Jennifer Hudson's life is bigger than one relationship. Her career existed before Common. Her strength existed before Common. Her identity existed before Common. And whatever happened between them, her story doesn't end there. Maybe the relationship survived. Maybe it didn't. Maybe they learned something from each other. Maybe they simply reached a point where their paths were no longer moving in the same direction. Only the people involved know what truly happened behind closed doors. But one thing is certain. Jennifer Hudson has already shown the world that she can survive devastating loss, rebuild herself, and keep moving forward. And if there is one lesson hidden inside this entire Hollywood relationship saga, it's this. Sometimes the strongest decision isn't fighting to keep a relationship alive. Sometimes it's knowing when your peace is worth more. And perhaps that's why people continue to watch Jennifer Hudson so closely. Not because she needs a famous man beside her, but because after everything she's been through, fans want to see her choose a life that makes her genuinely happy. No matter who stands beside her. No matter what the headlines say. And no matter what the internet thinks it knows. Because in the end, the cameras only show us